Apartheid in South Africa was a system of institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination that profoundly shaped the country's history. Rooted in earlier colonial policies, apartheid officially became state policy after 1948 under the rule of the National Party. The origins of racial division in South Africa go back to the arrival of European settlers. In 1652, Dutch colonists established the Cape Colony, displacing indigenous people. The British later took control in the early 19th century. By the time South Africa became a union in 1910, white minority rule was firmly in place, excluding black South Africans from political power. A key precursor to apartheid was the 1913 Natives Land Act, which limited black South Africans to just 7% of the land, later increased to 13%, despite making up the majority of the population. This laid the groundwork for decades of racial and economic inequality. In 1948, the National Party, largely supported by the white African population, won national elections and introduced apartheid as an official government policy. The word apartheid, meaning apartness in Afrikaans, described a system designed to separate people according to race. The white minority sought to maintain dominance over the country's political, economic, and social structures. Several major laws defined apartheid. The Population Registration Act of 1950 classified all South Africans into racial groups: white, black, colored, mixed race, and Indian. This classification determined where people could live, work, go to school, and even whom they could marry. The Group Areas Act of the same year established separate residential areas for each race, leading to the forced removal of thousands of black South Africans from urban centers to designated homelands or underdeveloped townships. The Bantu Education Act of 1953 created a deliberately inferior education system for black South Africans, designed to prepare them only for manual labor and subservient roles. Apartheid extended into every aspect of daily life. Black South Africans were required to carry passbooks at all times, restricting their movement and access to white areas. Public amenities such as buses, schools, hospitals, and even benches were segregated under the Separate Amenities Act. Political representation for non-whites was virtually non-existent. Black South Africans could not vote in national elections or hold significant positions of power. Resistance to apartheid was strong and persistent. The African National Congress, ANC, founded in 1912, became the leading anti-apartheid movement. Figures like Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, and Walter Sisulu rose to prominence as leaders in the struggle. One of the earliest large-scale campaigns was the Defiance Campaign of 1952, where activists deliberately broke apartheid laws in acts of civil disobedience. International attention intensified after events such as the Sharpeville Massacre in 1960. The government responded by banning the ANC and other liberation movements, pushing many activists underground or into exile. In 1961, the ANC formed an armed wing called Umkhonto weSizwe, which carried out sabotage against government installations. The apartheid regime faced increasing pressure, both domestically and internationally. The Soweto Uprising in 1976 was a turning point. Thousands of black students protested against being forced to learn in Afrikaans, a language they associated with their oppressors. The brutal police crackdown left hundreds dead, sparking further resistance and drawing global condemnation. During the 1980s, South Africa experienced widespread internal unrest. The government declared a state of emergency to control protests and political violence. At the same time, international sanctions and boycotts, especially from Western nations, increased the economic and diplomatic isolation of South Africa. The fall of apartheid began in the late 1980s. Recognizing the unsustainability of apartheid, President F.W. de Klerk initiated a series of reforms. In 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison after 27 years. Banned political organizations were legalized, and negotiations for a new democratic South Africa began. In 1991, apartheid laws were officially repealed, marking the end of the legal framework of racial segregation. South Africa's first fully democratic elections were held in 1994. Nelson Mandela was elected president, symbolizing a new era for the nation. The peaceful transition was hailed as a remarkable achievement. To address the human rights abuses committed under apartheid, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, was established under the leadership of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The TRC aimed to uncover the truth, promote national healing, and offer amnesty to those who confess their crimes. Despite the end of apartheid, its legacy remains deeply embedded in South African society. Economic inequality, poverty, and social divisions along racial lines continue to pose significant challenges. The journey from racial oppression to democracy in South Africa stands as both a testament to the resilience of its people and a reminder of the enduring struggle for justice and equality. Even though apartheid officially ended in 1994, its effects continue to shape the daily lives of many South Africans today. The modern South African society is often described as a democracy with deep structural inequalities, many of which are directly linked to the apartheid era. While political rights have been extended to all citizens, social and economic realities reveal a more complicated picture. One of the most visible legacies of apartheid is economic inequality. South Africa remains one of the most unequal countries in the world. A large percentage of the country's wealth is still concentrated in the hands of a minority, while the majority, particularly Black South Africans, continue to live in poverty. This wealth gap is not accidental. It is the result of decades of racially discriminatory laws that denied Black people access to quality education, land ownership, high-paying jobs, and business opportunities. Today, although there are Black South Africans in positions of wealth and power, systemic inequality persists. Many Black families are still living in overcrowded townships that were originally created under apartheid's Group Areas Act. These areas often lack reliable public services, good schools, and healthcare facilities, making upward mobility difficult. Education, a key factor in breaking the cycle of poverty, is another area where apartheid's shadow still looms. The Bantu education system deliberately underdeveloped Black South Africans' educational opportunities, leaving behind generational gaps in skills and literacy. Post-apartheid governments have made efforts to reform education, but many public schools in historically Black areas still suffer from poor infrastructure, underfunding, and overcrowding. Wealthier South Africans, mostly white or members of the emerging Black middle class, often send their children to private schools or well-resourced public schools in formerly white areas. This creates a two-tier education system where opportunities are unevenly distributed. Housing and spatial inequality also remain pressing issues. Apartheid policies forced non-white South Africans into separate, often underdeveloped residential zones. Even today, many Black South Africans live far from economic centers, enduring long and costly commutes to work. Efforts to build new housing have not fully addressed these imbalances. Informal settlements, areas where people live in shacks without basic services, are widespread, especially around major cities like Johannesburg and Cape Town. These settlements highlight the struggle many face in accessing dignified living conditions decades after apartheid's end. Employment patterns still reflect the racial divides of the past. Although affirmative action policies such as Black Economic Empowerment, BEE, have been introduced to increase Black South Africans' participation in the economy, unemployment rates remain significantly higher among Black and colored populations compared to white South Africans. Many Black South Africans are employed in lower-paying, less secure jobs, while white South Africans remain overrepresented in high-income professions. This has fueled frustration and social tension, particularly among young people who feel excluded from the country's economic progress. Cultural and social life in South Africa today also shows signs of both progress and division. On one hand, South Africa is celebrated for its yet issues of racial tension and mistrust still surface. Incidents of racism, both subtle and overt, continue to be reported in schools, workplaces, and on social media. The national conversation often circles back to race, identity, and the question of how to fully overcome the apartheid legacy. Moreover, land ownership remains a deeply contested issue. During apartheid, the vast majority of land was owned by white South Africans. Despite efforts at land reform, progress has been slow and controversial. Many Black South Africans still lack access to land for farming or housing, leading to political debates about expropriation without compensation. This issue is not just about land, it is about restoring dignity and correcting historical injustices. South Africa's government faces the complex challenge of balancing reconciliation with transformation. Institutions like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission helped address past crimes, but many ordinary citizens still feel the effects of unaddressed economic and social injustices.